Hi, everybody. Welcome to our KML Foundation Table Talk vlog. I'm really excited again to be able to come to you with this edition because this is going to be very practical. You know, every month we talk about estate planning and different processes and things that are related to estate planning. But maybe we've just kind of ignored one very basic issue is how do you do it? Just what is the step-by-step process of creating an estate plan? And I think when we go through this, you're going to realize it really is not that complicated. And so today, my guest is a return guest, our friend David Strazy. He's an attorney who specializes in estate planning, and we're going to just chat a little bit about the process and try to give you maybe a little bit more of a comfort level. And so if you've ever been hesitant to say, boy, I don't know if I can do this or if I should do this, by the end of this short vlog, you'll be able to say, I'm very comfortable because I know now what the process is. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
Let's start just very basic right away to say people think, boy, I don't know an estate plan. I don't have money for an estate plan. I'm not that rich and everything. And then they might get to the point of going, well, what is the process? So what are some of the first decisions people have to make before actually creating their estate plan?
So I think some of the more important decisions would be who do you want to serve in the various roles, okay? And without getting into the formalities of things, you want to consider who do you want to make financial decisions for you, not only in the event that you're unable to make those decisions for yourself, but also who's going to make those financial decisions and handle your affairs after you pass away. You also want to give consideration to who's going to make healthcare decisions for you. And then finally, another big thing to ponder before even starting the process is where do you want your estate, regardless of how great of an estate that may be, where do you want it to go? What individuals, what charities do you want to favor in terms of the distribution of your estate? Those are some of the big things that you want to consider before even starting the process.
David, one of the things just personally that I had and in talking to other people is you say, pick some of these people. And I'll tell you, to me, that was the hardest part. Who am I going to choose to make those health or financial decisions for me? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is trust. I think a lot of people focus too much on location or even age or health or relationship. That is the reason why we set up alternates. Okay, so this is not just one person that you designate. We always want to set up a good scheme of alternates. So if the first is unable or unwilling to serve, we have one, if not two or three others that can serve after that person. So I think the focus should always be on financially, who's going to be fiscally responsible, who's going to be able to competently handle your affairs and handle your estate, depending upon the composition of it. And then also health-wise, who shares similar beliefs and values, who shares similar end-of-life type choices as you do. And really the focus should be more on the trust factor more than anything else.
So if we're talking about, for instance, the health decisions, do I have to pick somebody who has medical knowledge, like a nurse, a doctor, something like that for the financial? Do I have to pick somebody who's maybe a financial planner and knows finances professionally?
I think as to the financial side of things, it depends upon the type of estate. Okay. For a more basic estate, I don't think you need to choose someone that necessarily has a lot of financial prowess. They're certainly going to be represented by an attorney usually. They're going to have the advice and counsel of a financial advisor and or an accountant. With more complex estates, for example, if there are maybe complex real estate holdings involved or business interests involved, maybe under those circumstances, you do want to have someone that has more insight and knowledge as to those types of assets. Okay, so I think it really depends upon the nature of the estate with that question. As it relates to healthcare, I certainly don't think you need to have someone with a health background, although that certainly can be beneficial. I think the biggest consideration with that is going to be, more of the beliefs and value system, and making sure that someone understands really what your wishes are as it relates to, treatment, and long-term care and, religious considerations.
Okay, good, good. So I think most of the listeners probably are not in situations where they have those extremely complex cases. And so you can pick somebody that you know and trust, basically. Are there any requirements, for instance, age or proximity for those people?
On the financial side, I actually handle a lot of trust administrations with out-of-state trustees, and just with online banking and the virtual world that we live in, even location is not nearly as important as it used to be. As it relates to age, clearly you want someone that's reached an age where they're going to be mature and responsible enough with their own financial affairs if you're going to trust them to manage and handle yours. What that age is really depends upon the client and again the nature of the estate and the trust level that's involved.
And that brings another question, because sometimes I know young couples, maybe they have their first child and they realize I better have an estate plan here because I'm concerned about my minor children and guardianship and so forth. But maybe they choose their parents to be some of the representatives. Well, they also realize my parents will probably go to heaven before I will. Can this be changed?
Yeah, so all of these designations typically can be amended. I like to refer to most estate planning documents as living documents, whether that be a will, a revocable trust, powers of attorney. They can be changed as life circumstances change, and it's not uncommon, for example, as your children reach adulthood, you would start to designate them in these roles, and we would eliminate parents or siblings for financial and or healthcare decision making. So, it's an evolution, and these documents can and will be updated.
I think that's a great comfort for people to know that this isn't a once-in-a-lifetime decision. They can be changed and updated over time. So if I understand correctly, the first thing is make some decisions, particularly who's going to be your representatives for important aspects of your life, and then your possessions. How are those going to be distributed? So let's imagine people make those decisions. Okay, this is who's going to do the health, who's going to do the finance, maybe guardian for minor children, and distribution of assets. They made those decisions. Now what?
So the first step is typically setting up a meeting with myself or another attorney. And I know a lot of people can be pretty apprehensive going into that meeting. At least in my practice, it's very informal. All right, we just sit down. I want to get to know more about you and your family. I want to get to know more about your portfolio, what you own. And then we discuss goals. What do you want to accomplish? Where do you want your wealth to go? Again, what individuals or charities do you want to favor? We talk about the different designations, and I'll maybe make some recommendations or bring up some concerns or things to think about depending upon who you want to designate in these various roles. And then at that meeting, I'll throw out just different options, different ways that we can accomplish your wishes, whether that be a simple will, a revocable trust, irrevocable trust. It really depends upon how that meeting goes and what the client is interested in accomplishing.
I think the way you describe that is so good because, you started off with, it's pretty informal. And I often tell this story. It's kind of comical, but it's also, I think, indicative. There was a couple that I had met with a number of years ago, and we got to the point where they made all their decisions. They were meeting with the attorney. They had picked the attorney. We had picked a date to go see the attorney, and they were still hesitant. And I just asked them, what's concerning you? And they said, we've never been to an attorney before. What do we wear? That was just a concern for them because they didn't know. And so be assured, don't worry about it. This is not something that's so formal. The process, maybe, but not the setting. So secondly, then, you mentioned some different tools. You talked about a will. You talked about a revocable trust, an irrevocable trust, and so forth. And people now are going to be confused because they don't know what those are necessarily. So explain how you help them decide that.
So in that first meeting, after I get to know the client better, that's really going to frame for me what options are on the table and what options are going to best serve their interests. And one of my goals in that meeting is to educate. So I certainly don't expect any of my clients to be experts in estate planning by the end of it, but I want to explain at a basic level what some of these things are, and what certain things accomplish, what certain things don't accomplish. And then, I want to lead them to make the decision for themselves. Okay, so I will educate them in basic terms as to what a revocable trust is versus an irrevocable trust and why it matters.
And here again, I get the feeling maybe people think of attorneys as dictatorial. They tell you what you're going to do. This is what the law determines or demands. And if I understand correctly, you're saying that's not the way estate planning works. You're more give and take discussion, guiding them, but they make the decisions. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is my style. I mean, attorneys operate in different ways, and maybe some estate planners are more of that model where they try to, force something on the client. My job all along has been I want the client to make the decision. I'm not here to tell them what to do. Of course, people have different budgets. They have different goals. They have different wishes. If I have properly educated them and they fully understand what they're doing and what the limitations may or may not be, then I've done my job, regardless of whether they do what I would have done in their position.
Sure. And the way I guess I've described it a lot of times is you come with your decisions made. The attorney is the one that's going to help you make sure what you want is going to get done.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why having some of those key things worked out, who you're going to designate in these various roles and the distribution of your estate, and even just certain ways where the client can get me more general biographical information. I have an organizer that they can complete. That's very helpful, and it makes that first meeting more efficient because I can then focus on the legal side and determine, okay, what is really going to accomplish their wish and what is in their best interest.
Sure. So we're describing what I would say is your first meeting with the client. How long does that take?
The first meeting, about an hour to an hour and a half, depending upon the circumstances and the complexity of it. Usually it doesn't go beyond an hour and a half.
Here again, David, people start talking attorneys and they see the clock running and the dollars adding up. Are they going to come in and say, we got to keep this short so we don't pay more? Or I don't want to ask a bunch of questions. It's going to cost us more. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't know, other attorneys have different billing approaches, but it's precisely because of that I do not bill for the first meeting. I don't want there to be any pressure as to, the ticking, timeline, if you will, of the meeting. I just want them to be open. I want it to be casual. I want them to open up to me without worrying about the clock and what they're being billed for it.
So there again, just what you said so far, we have more, but you make decisions, what you want. You go to the attorney and you say, this is what I want to have done, and you just talk openly with no pressure, and you guide them into how to get legally done what they want to have done. And it should be very relaxed from that standpoint, even though it's very important.
Right. And I try to keep things light. I know that these decisions are difficult, and not everyone wants to think about becoming incapacitated or passing away. So I try to keep things light and keep the client relaxed. I think that's an important part of the process because, my job is to try to glean things from people that they're not easy to necessarily open up about. I need to know about the family dynamics. I need to know what their wishes are. And in this context, if you create a lot of pressure and tension, people are reluctant to open up about those things. So I try to be very relaxed and very informal and just, put them at ease that this is just a dialogue. Nothing is happening. Nothing is being billed. Let's just talk and see, where things go.
That sounds very, very positive. So you end the meeting. You've given them a plan of what you see as the way to go forward, the documents and so forth you're going to create. What happens after that first meeting? This is such a valuable topic, and I think there's so much information. We decided to end the first episode here. And so we've taken you through the preliminary making decisions and the first meeting and some of that information. And now next month, we're going to continue. And we're going to talk a little bit about what happens after that first meeting, because that's where you really get the documents. That's where you really make the decisions on what you do going forward. And so really encourage you to tune in again next month as we continue section 2, part 2 of this very timely topic of just the estate planning process. And remember, we do this because it's your life, it's your plan, and it's your legacy. We'll see you next month.